This is a 9mm lens, and as you can see, it is quite wide. So this entire video will be filmed with this lens, and hopefully by the end of today's video, you're able to find out whether this lens is any good and whether you should be picking one of these up. Right off the bat, the first thing that I like about this lens is that it is rectilinear. So I'm able to get extreme wide shots without getting that fisheye sort of circular effect. And that fisheye lens is usually associated with extreme wide lenses, usually around this focal length of like 8 or 10 millimeters. But before we continue, Brightin Star did send me this lens for me to test out, but all the thoughts in this video are my own and they did not get to see this video before you do. So this lens is about $500 US, $479 to be exact at the time of the making of this video. And they have it available for Sony E mount, L mount, Nikon Z mount, and Canon RF mount. And yes, Canon finally has open licensing to third-party lens companies. In this video, I'm using it with my Sony A7 IV, so I'm using the Sony E mount version. This is a full frame lens and it gives you about a 13.5mm focal length if you use it on an APS-C camera. It has an aperture that goes from f5.6 to f22. This has 5 lens blades. It is a manual lens, so it has no autofocus, and it has no electronic contact points with your camera. This lens has a nice metal construction, but because of that, it's a little bit on the heavier side, coming at about 470 grams. The front of the lens is round. That means that you cannot mount traditional lens filters, and this is very common with extreme wide lenses. But there is a 34mm thread on the rear of the lens for you to mount ND filters and other filters. But there's a little bit of an annoyance that I have with that, and I'll be talking about that just in a bit. The focusing ring has a nice resistance, and it's about 90 degrees to go from its closest focusing distance to infinity. The aperture ring is clicked, so you're able to get that tactile experience as you switch apertures. It also comes with a lens hood that is non-removable. It comes with a nice lens cap made of metal, unlike this plastic cap from other lenses. So the focusing distance of this lens is about 20 centimeters, which is really close. And with that, you're able to get really close to your subject and get very interesting extreme wide shots. The lens is quite sharp in a center wide open at f5.6. But as we move towards mid-frame, you have to stop down a bit to get better results. At around f8, the mid-frames look quite good. In terms of the corners though, things get really messy and quite interesting in here. Because of vignetting, things are quite blurry throughout as soon as you approach any of these edges and corners. It is not good wide open at f5.6 in the corners, but things do get a little bit better at f8 and when you close down a bit more. But overall, not a very good lens in the corners. There is quite a bit of distortion in this lens, as you can probably see, but in most cases it does not bother me too much because it helps focus the shot to the center of the frame most of the time and draws that attention to the focus of the frame. When you take a closer look at the corners though, sometimes you get a bit of a greenish color cast in the corners. There is some barrel distortion with this lens, and this is more noticeable when you're shooting stuff with straight lines. However, in the real world, I have to say that for the focal length that this is, the distortion is pretty acceptable. So let's talk about that 34mm lens thread at the rear of the lens. There is no extra piece of glass there, so either you use this lens with a filter or without. Since the filter thread is 34mm, the filters that can be attached here are quite small. And due to the construction of the lens, attaching an ND filter or any filter whatsoever can be a little bit of a slow process and a little bit difficult. So this is something to keep in mind if you're out in the field and want to quickly swap ND filters or any filters. It's not going to be a quick process. You're going to have to detach your lens and slowly attach or detach that ND filter. And also, if you're using this, make sure that you bring something to clean that filter, because you most likely are going to touch that filter when you're swapping it or when you're putting it on and off. That being said though, it is a very nice option to have this ability to mount a rare filter. Some other extreme wide lens options out there do not even give you a rare filter thread option. I received an ND64 and ND1000 to use with this lens, and there's also a filter that Brightin Star has that is called the natural night filter. And this filter is used to cut down a lot of those common wavelengths that you find in artificial lighting. So if you use this at night for cityscapes or astrophotography, you're able to reduce the amount of light pollution in your shots. So pretty handy if you're doing a lot of night shots. The flaring that I got from this lens was overall quite well controlled, and I like the way some of those flares look in my images. However, depending on the angle the sun is outside of your frame, you might get some weird ghosting artifacts, just like the images here. You can get rid of this if you slightly reframe your shot or shade your lens a bit more. The sun stars that I get with this lens are quite nice and quite pleasant in my opinion. You're not going to get too much in terms of bokeh and autofocus elements because it is such a wide lens. But in this photo, I did find some round bokeh balls. Again, because it is so wide and also a slow lens at f5.6, you're not gonna get too much in terms of chromatic aberration, unless you go into the corners and things get really messy again. So should you be getting this lens? I think that if you want an extreme wide lens that is not going to break the bank, this is a very solid option. I like the fact that it is rectilinear and I'm not getting a ton of distortion even at such an extreme wide focal length. This lens does have some flaws and it is not the sharpest one throughout, but it's actually very fun to use. The ability to add in an ND filter at the rear of the lens is a very great inclusion, even though mounting an ND filter at the rear of the lens can be quite finicky and a little bit difficult at times. In terms of video, I think this lens is very unique because you're able to get extreme wide looks and different and interesting angles. Overall, I think this is a great option if you want an extreme wide lens to add to your camera bag without having to spend a lot of money. So anyways, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And here are a couple of videos you could probably watch next, and I'll see you there.